Eric Zimmerman, welcome.
Hi everyone, good morning, and please excuse my English. That's what I'll be speaking today. I just want to thank Daniel, Evelina, the Goethe-Institut. It's a really amazing series of programs that you guys have put together. The exhibition looks great, so it's really a pleasure to help kick it off and be here today. So, like Daniel said, my name is Eric Zimmerman, and I'm here today to talk to you about an essay written by Eric Zimmerman. And that essay is called Manifesto for a Ludic Century. There's a lot that's wrong with this very problematic and misguided essay, and so that's what we're going to be discussing this morning. But before I begin and talk about Zimmerman's essay, it's important to note that his theorizing, his writing like this, comes out of his design work. He's first and foremost a game designer, so just to give a little bit of context for Manifesto for a Ludic Century, he does have an academic position at NYU. He's written a book or two, as Daniel mentioned, co-authored, but he's a designer at heart. He makes games on the computer, he makes games off the computer, but let's talk about his attempt to move from designing to theorizing. Last year, Zimmerman, this Eric Zimmerman that I'm talking about, published an essay online. It's about the idea of this ludic century, the idea that we're living in a time, a century, that will be defined by games. Now, I'm not sure if the essay got a lot of coverage in Poland, but it did attract a surprising amount of attention in the United States from game scholars and critics, designers, and players. It's a simple essay. It's very short. We're actually now looking at the entire manifesto. Each of these headlines sort of unfolds into a paragraph or two. So each section as a little headline, and then it sort of goes on to have some fine print. Now, in this short critique, I don't have time to go over every line of the essay, but let's follow these headlines and see if this actually adds up to anything or not. So, the main argument of Manifesto for a Ludic Century goes something like this: that the 20th century was an age of information, with the rise of computers. Digital technology abstracted data, allowing the existing technologies of bureaucracy to expand and envelop our lives. In the 21st century, where we are now, this information has been put at play. The moving image becomes the interactive experience, and the game becomes a dominant cultural form. So, what's wrong with this picture, right, that Zimmerman is painting? Well, I want to assert that Zimmerman suffers from a particularly American notion of progress. This sort of uncritically optimistic idea that things are advancing, evolving, getting better, right? Was the 20th century really a century of information? Was it perhaps a century of war or of death? A century of injustices, of great inequity of capital? If we wanted to indulge in this exercise of gross historical simplification, there are so many ways that we could frame the 20th century. So why does Zimmerman see games as so central? Part of it, I believe, is a sort of professional myopia, right? He is a game designer, and he thinks that games will be the defining cultural form of the 21st century. What a surprise, right? That a game designer would think that. So from this point of view, the essay is really nothing more than a designer who's shoring up his own disciplinary authority. But before we dismiss it altogether, let's take a look at some of the details. So, according to Zimmerman, there are three ideas that tie together the ludic century: systems, play, and design. These are, according to Zimmerman, the defining characteristics of our time, our 21st century that we're living in, and they're also the defining characteristics of games themselves. So let's start with systems. According to Zimmerman, and I'm just going to quote some of the text that's on the screen, the ways that we work and communicate, research and learn, socialize and romance, conduct our finances and communicate with our governments are all intimately intertwined with complex systems of information. So I want to ask, what is Zimmerman thinking? What are these systems of which Zimmerman is writing? So Zimmerman links systems to games, but what really are games? To play a game is to follow its rules. A completely arbitrary set of rules. These rules are given by a higher authority, the designer. The rules are there to ensure that there's some kind of conflict. The conflict takes the form of a competition with a winner, and the outcome becomes quantified, numerically quantified. So if we think about games in this way, arbitrary authority, conflict, competition, reduction of everything to a numerical outcome, what's so wonderful about this idea of games as systems? Why are systems seen as intrinsically good? Why are not systems seen as potentially harmful, right? Systems of surveillance, of corruption, of waste, of oppression that can lead to fascism, fundamentalism, intolerance. When we reduce the world to systems, what's lost? So Zimmerman, by the way, doesn't stop with systems. He then encourages us to play. And according to Zimmerman, systems may be highly analytic, but play saves us, Zimmerman would have us believe, by injecting a human element into the system. In his co-authored book, Rules of Play, written with Katie Salen, Zimmerman talks about play as free play within a more limited system. He likes to talk about the idea that, in English at least, we use this idea of play when we talk about a system of gears, right? In English we say play is the amount that gears can move a little bit of wiggle room between the gears before they engage and do their defined function, right? So this is his model for play, a little bit of movement within a more rigid system. So this is a highly formal, highly structural idea of play. And it's hardly the key to understanding the human element in systems, right? It's hardly an engine of innovation and creativity, as he writes. It feels more like a dehumanizing reduction. Now, to try and understand Zimmerman's particular point of view about systems and play, I'm going to lead you through an exercise that I've seen Zimmerman do before. So I just want to warn you, this exercise may be fun and enjoyable, but don't let that get in the way of our serious critique of his work here. So I think it demonstrates everything that's wrong with his point of view. So the game is called Five Fingers. And here's how it's going to work. So in just a moment when we start playing, you're going to sort of turn and find a small group of people near you, maybe 4, 5, 6 people. It even works with 3 people. Here's how it works. So you're going to put up one hand with 5 fingers. This is your life. When you're out of fingers, you're out of the game, and you can't play anymore. Someone is going to begin, and then you're going to take turns going around the circle. When it's your turn, you only do one thing. You point at someone with your other hand. So you have, let's see if I can do this with the microphone, one hand with 5 fingers up, and you point at someone else. The person that you point at loses a finger. Okay, and then it's another person's turn. So that's it. It's an extremely simple game. So let's get started. So turn and find a small group of people near you. Put up one hand with 5 fingers, and with the other hand, you're going to point at someone. And just go around the circle. Okay? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The exact number doesn't matter that much. Go ahead. No, I'm going to observe. Go ahead. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to try and finish up the games, play quickly, and get to the end. All right. Okay, boys and girls, finish your games, settle down. All right, just waiting for one. It's always the larger groups that take a little bit longer. All right, so let's see if we can settle back, everybody. Final game, final tournament at the back of the room, finishing up. Okay, so I just want to ask, what just happened, right? I want to point out how easy it is to follow rules, to fall into a system, right? Now, there were so many wonderful things happening in the course of playing this game. There was, I think, a rule invention here about being able to point to yourself. I couldn't translate all of the conversation going on, but I could tell that there was a lot of laughter. There was a lot of negotiation going on. Maybe as you start to realize that this fun, simple exercise is actually a sort of a cruel political experiment. The entire energy of the group, everyone's personal experience, in the end, becomes distilled into a single number, one person winning, right? And I feel that this is so wrong, right? What about the social interactions you had? The people that you met that you didn't know before, the negotiation, the cheating, those that decided not to play. Instead, we have competition, elimination, quantification, the sort of autistic side of games. And play is so much more than what designers like Zimmerman think that it is. And we need to play more than Zimmerman ever might, and in more dangerous ways. But before we get ahead of ourselves, like I said, his three main ideas in this essay, systems and play, that we've just explored, and there's more, there's design. So Zimmerman says that we should think like designers. And again, what is Zimmerman thinking? In the narratives of power circulating around games, designers are the privileged. They're separated from the struggles of players. They're shored up inside their palaces of rules. And I want to ask you, why is Zimmerman telling us how to think like designers? We should not think like designers, that is, the arbiters of the game's arbitrary authority. Zimmerman has it backwards. The future of games, the direction of our so-called ludic century, cannot be in reinscribing these existing traditional power relationships. We should not think like designers. We should think like players. Okay, where does Zimmerman go from here, getting near the end of the essay? Games are literacy. Now, this is actually one of the points of agreement that I have with Mr. Zimmerman, that games are about meaning. That meaning is what's at stake. And that's actually why we're here today, right? At this conference, to discuss their meaning, what they mean, to whom, in what context, and why. To ask, how can games be meaningful to their players, their scholars and critics, to culture and society outside of games? These are complex questions. Meanwhile, to answer them, Zimmerman offers these shallow platitudes that, gaming literacy can address our problems, and that in the ludic century, everyone will be a game designer. I need to stand up against Zimmerman and tell him, no, we will not all be like you, Mr. Zimmerman. We do not think that game designers are a role model for everyone to follow. This idea of authorship, of great geniuses creating culture in a top-down manner, seems so 20th century. If anything, we're in a time when the potential for everyone to create whatever they want is on the rise. To use a buzzword, we're sort of in Web 3.0. So let me be clear. We will exterminate the game designers, starting with you, Mr. Zimmerman. They will be replaced by players who do not want to be subject to their authority, who throw off the shackles of the systems that Zimmerman fetishizes. And if you think that I'm turning Zimmerman into a simple cartoon, simplifying his ideas just in order to knock them down, if you need proof of his reactionary extremity, let's see how he finishes this manifesto. The final headline, games are beautiful. They do not need to be justified. So Zimmerman ends the manifesto with this, the most shallow point of his theoretical equation. By bringing in ideas of beauty, Zimmerman is bringing us into the realm of art and aesthetics. He claims to be heralding a new century, bringing us into the 21st century. But this idea of the beautiful, as he frames it here, that games and play are important because they're beautiful in and of themselves, is a theoretical move that separates aesthetics from culture, society, politics. It's, if anything, 20th century modernism, or perhaps 19th century romanticism, certainly not some kind of new stance for the 21st century. Zimmerman wants us to think of games as beautiful, as art. But what is art today? Well, less than a week ago, I saw an art installation by the American artist Kara Walker. The artwork took place in a sugar factory, an abandoned factory where they made sugar, Domino Sugar Factory in Brooklyn. And the factory is scheduled to be torn down. Kara Walker's artwork, called A Subtlety or The Marvelous Sugar Baby, included human-sized sculptures that are actually made from sugar resin. So they're of stylized child laborers. And they're actually interacting with the environment and the humidity and dripping and transforming over time. The centerpiece of the installation is this sphinx-like figure with racially stereotyped African features that's covered in 35 tons of sugar. This is a complex work. It's so difficult to give it justice here, but it's an artwork about labor and exploitation, chemistry and ecology, but also light and space and material, and the destruction of a local factory that has implications far beyond this particular site. The artwork is actually made of sugar and comments simultaneously on the politics of labor that produce sugar. And this is taking place within a factory for one of the biggest sugar companies in the world, who's also a corporate sponsor of the artwork. Yet the factory itself, built in the 19th century, is collapsing, like the antiquated labor practices that are depicted in the artwork or represented in the artwork. It really is literally collapsing. So to enter this exhibition, you have to sign a waiver form, a contract, that releases the presenting organization from any liability in case you're damaged from the hazardous chemicals or structure of the factory itself. So although the factory is scheduled for demolition, at the same time there's a movement in New York City to preserve the factory, this beautiful 19th century building. In fact, the exhibition opened on the day before the city council hearing about the proposed demolition. The art exhibit cannot openly support the preservation of the building because the Domino Sugar Company is sponsoring the show and making money from selling the land on which the factory sits. Yet by letting the public inside the factory, the artwork is also acting as a political catalyst for the movement around the preservation of the building itself. So the questions that Zimmerman is asking should be, where are these games? Where are the games that can do justice to all of the layers of an artwork, like Kara Walker's installation, the complexity of society, of art, of cultural production today? Now, we all love games. We play them, we study them, we make them. We're fascinated by games. That's why we're here today. But because we love them, let's not fetishize them. Let's not become infatuated with their rules and systems. If we loved literature, many of us may be lovers of literature here. If we were passionate about literature, dedicating our careers to literature, would we talk about books and how great they are? Talk about inks and pages and letters, the century of the book? Would we be trying to convince everyone to appreciate books, to convince them that books can change society, be actively trying to bookify the world? The Manifesto for a Ludic Century is what we call in English a pep talk. It's a cheerleading essay. It's desperate to show how great games are. I want to say it's time for us to stop being cheerleaders and be critical and dissatisfied with our own work, with games, with each other. Loving books shouldn't make you a cheerleader for books. It should make you a snob. It should make you like less books and hate more of them, right? We need to be game snobs. Some conclusions. A game designer defining our time in terms of games is really an act of self-promotion. Systems are not some kind of panacea. Surveillance, oppression, and justice are also systems. Do not follow the rules given by the designers. Don't be a designer, be a player. Don't be a cheerleader for games, be a snob. And finally, be playful. Thank you very much.